Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So I wanted to talk about Putin's war crimes in Ukraine. And I'm pointedly avoiding saying Russia's war crimes because it might come across that I'm demonizing a whole nation. I don't want to insult a whole nation. And this is usually we attribute it to a country, but obviously just meaning the regime. And it's true that some Russians genuinely approve of what Putin is doing, partly because they're blinded by Russian state media. And just today, Russia's blocked Instagram and Facebook as so-called extremist. Anyone who tells the truth, who contradicts the Kremlin lie machine, is now extremist. So the war crimes in Ukraine have been numerous and extensive. They've not been isolated or few. And Putin did what he always does, which is to project, which is to accuse his victims of the very crimes that he's committing. That was the case with Magnitsky, accusing that valiant and blameless lawyer of stealing the $250 million that Putin's cronies had stolen in a tax refund fraud. But anyway, there's this report that the Russian army is taking thousands of Ukrainian civilians deep into Russia against their will. I'm not absolutely certain that one is true, but that would be a war crime against the Geneva Convention. So you're not to deport civilian populations to another country. You can, under certain circumstances, intern them, but it has to be in that country, not taking them across the frontier. Putin trying to be the new Stalin, that's exactly the kind of thing he would do, deport people thousands of kilometres from their homes. There have been numerous attacks on which are blatantly civilian targets, on blocks of flats and so on. I mean, unless there was an enemy soldier in there firing or something, well, that would be different. On hospitals and so on schools, even with the word children written there in Russian. So unless it really was turned into an enemy base, that would be different. On bomb shelters, up to 1,000 people sheltering in a certain theatre. Now, some of this could be malevolence, some of it could be incompetence. Now, Russia doesn't have used many smart bombs; they're too expensive. They use dumb bombs, and there was yet another blatant lie from Putin the other day, saying that his forces are striving to minimise civilian casualties. What a flagrant lie! Having said that, I don't know of any Russian civilians who've been killed by Ukrainian forces in this conflict, including those who are ethnically Russian in eastern Ukraine, over the past, 26 days. Now, the median estimate for the number of deaths in the past 26 days is 14,000 deaths. That's soldiers on both sides and civilians. So almost inevitably, some of those will be Russian civilians who have been killed, which of course is deeply regrettable. I mean, I'd rather nobody was killed, but when it does come to a war, killing enemy incompetence is permissible, and that's the first principle of war, that you must kill the enemy. Must also try to avoid civilian casualties. So again and again, he's tried to maximise civilian casualties, I suppose because the coup de main failed. He's trying to terrorise Ukraine into submission. Think he could club them insensible as he did to Chechnya, and think that this might actually sap their morale. He may be correct, in fact, to willfully kill as many civilians as he possibly can, and that'll simply break the Ukrainian will to resist, though they just can't bear to see some of their children, some of their geriatrics, some of their womenfolk slain. So really the insensate bloodlust of Putin knows no bounds. Anyway, so the pugnacity of the Ukrainians is giving the Russians a run for their money. And as I say, they prepared the ground for weapons of mass destruction attack. And attacking nuclear power stations, that was a war crime again. So again and again. Now, as for genocide, I don't think he's trying to annihilate the Ukrainian people, or indeed kill a substantial proportion of them. But he's completely indifferent to killing civilians. It doesn't bother him one whit, not trying to minimise it. And obviously the generals are carrying out his orders. They bear some command responsibility. I don't blame the ordinary soldiers at the lowest level. I don't think it's their fault. And the ones who are captured profess themselves to be horrified. But then again, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they've got to ingratiate themselves with their captors, because they're at the mercy of the Ukrainian military, who no doubt incensed by having seen so many of their civilians killed. So trying to starve Mariupol into capitulation. But I think that might actually be permissible. I mean, if you did surround a city, having invested it, of course, you wouldn't allow any comestibles or any other provisions in. So they killed many civilians. I mean, in fact, this war of aggression. That's a crime in itself, according to the Nuremberg Standard. And he's obviously broken the Genocide Convention because bogus accusations of genocide are specifically prohibited under the Genocide Convention. This is not a term to be bandied about freely. This is the gravest crime known to the human race. And so you must only make this accusation when you're certain it's true. It has to be people deliberately killing another ethnicity or religion on a significant scale because of their ethnicity and religion. It can't be a military operation. It can't be killing enemy fighters in a conflict. That's different. This is purposefully killing civilians. That's what genocide is. And it has to be on a large scale. It can't be 1 or 2 or 10 or maybe even 100. It has to be beyond that before we can count it as that. He's accusing the others of the very crimes that he himself is committing. So that's why it really is so disgraceful. So he did nothing to try and minimise civilian casualties, and that's what the European Union has correctly accused him of war crimes. And 2 former British Prime Ministers, Gordon Brown, John Major, said he ought to be arraigned before an international tribunal for these war crimes, the sort of thing he's committed again and again. So Western countries, they've stretched out the hand of forbearance to him again and again. He has grasped it falsely, obviously with his fingers crossed behind his back. He's smarmed them, he's gone on charm offensives, he's tried to butter them up, and he'll say anything he needs to. He's an utterly shameless liar. Most people are embarrassed to be caught lying, but he's not. That's absolutely second nature to him. So I think he lives in this delusional bubble and believes his own propaganda. I haven't heard those accusations of genocide from him too much more. Perhaps even he recognised how utterly preposterous this is, and there's no event that he can point to which is anything remotely approaching genocide. So it really is dreadful, and I'm just worried because he's frustrated the way that there's such a pitifully poor performance by his military, well, lackluster to say the least, that he might be resorting to weapons of mass destruction ere long, and of course try and pin the blame on Ukrainians because he's come out with these false accusations that they have biological weapons, chemical weapons, or nuclear weapons, or something like that, without providing any corroborating particulars. Where? How do you know? How much? Which particular chemical weapon? Which biological weapon? What's your proof? Where are the photos? Nothing. Just flagrant lying. Another thing is propaganda for war. To create a bogus pretext for war, that is also a war crime. So breaking the Hague Convention and the Geneva Convention again and again. And there can be no excuse for not knowing the Geneva Convention because it was drawn up in 1948, partly by the Soviets, and it's in Russian as well as English and French, and all 3 languages are equally authoritative. Russian soldiers have killed Ukrainian civilians deliberately, admittedly not on a huge scale. I mean, there's the bombs and the missiles. You could argue that's missing, was it collateral damage, but sometimes shooting them knowing they were civilians and unarmed. Now, it hasn't happened very much. Of the 200,000 Russian soldiers invaded, I don't hold them all culpable, so I'm very careful not to tar everybody with the same brush and not to try and besmirch the honour of the Russian army. Some that could be completely morally upstanding, but there's some of them who are not, who are evil. I know you'll find that in every army, but I'm sorry to say the evidence rather militates towards it being worse and more widespread in the Russian army than in most. So thank you for watching my channel, and please donate to me on PayPal. Is it Patreon or PayPal? GeorgeCallahan79@gmail.com. All right, toodaloo.